Hello everyone. As the leader of the combined forces of humanity against an existential threat to our existence, the commander of Azur is one of the most powerful people in the world. But just how powerful is he? And what are the limits of that power? Obviously, we're not just talking physical power here, because on that front the commander is just a guy. A guy with a military background who makes the girls' wisdom cubes feel warm and fuzzy in a way only he can, and sometimes has his existence rejected by the world for a second. Don't worry about it. At best, he's getting sawed in half by machine gun fire or going down with his ship. At worst, his remains would have to be collected by a dehumidifier. So he's not going to be winning many "my commander can beat up your commander" debates. Unless Manju starts being a pussy and makes the April Fool's power armor cannon. Gotta hand it to the guy though, his mental game is insane. Dude has the weight of the world on his shoulders. He is running a growing fleet of 570 ships, given human forms at one port, fighting against enemies that can produce new mass-produced ships in under 3/4 of an hour, are almost impossible to kill, and others that the human mind just straight up rejects. Throw on top of that the greatest enemy of them all, politics, and it's safe to say his job comes with a lot of stress. Most people would have a much less of a "fuck it we ball" attitude to one of their subordinates getting them blackout drunk in the name of immersion for their friend's escape room tabletop RPG, but the commander just takes it all in his stride. So either he's truly built different, or Bremerton is a really good counsellor. Alright, let's talk military power. The Azur is the most comically overpowered coalition in its world's history. It currently has more surface combatants than any navy of its time period, and the distribution is a lot more balanced. There are over 85 big gun capital ships alone, not counting ults. And the other hull types, minus submarines and other miscellaneous, have similar or even bigger numbers. And those numbers will only get bigger. That is a staggering amount of naval power, especially considering that shipbuilders eclipse the capabilities of regular warships. The Azur, and by extension its commander, basically own the seas by default if not for the sirens. This means they'd control the shipping lanes, and since the best way to move vast quantities of anything is to load it onto a big ass boat, that's some immense leverage over the rest of the world and their economies. But above all, the commander's power lies in his position. He is the sole commanding officer of humanity's main and only line of defence against an existential threat, and he can't be replaced. It's one thing to have someone who's as skilled a leader and tactician as the commander is implied to be, but it's another to have that person possess an abnormally high affinity for the wisdom cube. And that's what's most important for the person leading an alliance made of ships who are born from and powered by said cubes. He is the only one with the resonance capable of repairing Bismarck's and probably Amagi's damaged cube, and is likely to play a key role in whatever awakening turns out to be. That position of power is compounded by who he commands. Some of his most direct subordinates are the faction leaders, who all have significant positions within their home countries. Queen Elizabeth, for example, seems to be the de facto ruler of the Royal Islands, and Richelieu has now become the pontiff of the reunited Irish. On top of that, Bismarck and Sovietsky Soyuz both seem to be de jure rulers of their nations. That is a lot of influence that is subordinate to a single person, with only the Eagles and Sardinians seemingly answering to any kind of government. The Sakura's a mess, but Nagato will likely work with him, and Akagi is Akagi. Plus there's the 65,000-ton battleship in the room, who has a non-zero chance of being the Sakura Empress. Although that does beg the question what she's been doing all this time while her country devolves into a power struggle. On top of all that, the commander basically owns Antarctica. In order to prevent anyone from conquering it, authority for the continent was given to the Azur, and fleets of its member states may be at any time taken command of in the continent and its surrounding oceans. Therefore his authority there supersedes even the world's governments. Not that there's much reason to use it, given it's a frozen wasteland with a few research bases, fleet outposts, and the Northern Parliament's bunker. But it's still pretty neat. So that's what power the commander wields, at least hypothetically, but it comes with some drawbacks. First of all, The Azur is an alliance, not a monolithic bloc, at least not yet. Being the commander of the Azur is a lot like being the commander of the real-world NATO. Sure, the military strength of the organisation wields is comical, but all the assets, in this case shipgirls, belong to their respective member states, and as such, orders from their home countries or leaders takes priority over the commanders, with a few exceptions like emergencies or Antarctica. This is liable to change, however, with the ongoing negotiations to fully reform the organisation and how loyal the shipgirls are to their commander, especially someone like Bismarck who is surprisingly ride or die. If some or all of them feel their home nations don't have humanity's best interest at heart, they may choose to follow him instead. After all, these quote-unquote assets have their own autonomy. There's also the classic problem of logistics. As a military alliance, the Azur and any combat operations that it engages in don't run on hopes and dreams. They need supplies. Food, fuel, funding, and ammunition. Things no professional fighting force can go without. You lack any one and the whole thing starts to fall apart. And the Azur, as an alliance, is reliant on its members to keep them stocked up with what they need to keep fighting. It certainly helps having loyal subordinates within those member states with significant leverage though. I'm not saying the commander will use his massive fleet and their collective influence to take over those countries, however it is an option. So, to conclude, the commander is an extremely powerful individual, being the irreplaceable leader of the most powerful coalition force in history. His role as commander grants him immense political power, further compounded by the powerful individuals whom he commands. The great hard power, military might, and soft power, political position, is limited by the coalition nature of his organisation. While his great naval power could pressure the global economy, that global economy is what keeps his ships fed and equipped. In addition, its current splintered nature means that most orders from his ship's home nations take precedent over his own, with exceptions such as the World Expo and Antarctic crises, as opposed to a more consolidated alliance where he is the definitive authority. Anyway, that's all for this time, so as usual, fair winds and following seas.